think we're good.
I think that's our cue, Greg Pickel. Time to talk a lot of football here on the Penn State Blitz on Penn Live. Big week, Greg, coming off the bye week. I hope you enjoyed yours. I know I enjoyed mine. It's Penn State Michigan week, and the fan base is really stoked. Penn State's now number 2 after another rash of upsets. We got 4 downs for talking points. We got an overtime with some from questions and comments from some of the people who are kind of checking in with us. That's going to be great. Before we get started, though, just remember to subscribe to Penn Live's Penn State channel, and you can do that by going to youtube.com/allpennstate. You don't want to miss it. You got to get on it. Had some good stuff. James Franklin was in Harrisburg on bye weekend Saturday, checking out some Harrisburg Cougars action. I'm sure he liked what he saw. So let's talk, though, Greg. Penn State and Michigan, as we discuss it right now. Penn State's about a 10-point favorite. All expectations are that it should be very, very low scoring. But talking to James Franklin today during his press conference and listening to him talk, boy, nothing puts a bigger smile on his face, Greg, than the thought of the whiteout and a primetime game at Beaver Stadium with the crowd just going nuts. You saw what happened last year in the Penn State-Ohio State game. Crowd had a huge impact on that game. What do you think this venue and this atmosphere means for a Michigan offense that's just struggled all year? Yeah,
I mean, we've seen them in a monsoon 2 weeks ago against Michigan State. We saw them in a game against the Indiana defense that wasn't very good against Penn State, and the Nittany Lions were obviously pretty good against Indiana's defense. So I don't really understand how they could possibly expect to really have success at Beaver Stadium in front of 107 or whatever it is, 1,000 screaming fans. And if they had all these issues when they're playing Indiana, when they're playing Michigan State, obviously the weather was a factor against the Spartans, but how do you have any confidence at all that the Wolverines can figure it out and then do so when they can't really communicate? You know, John O'Korn, our sister cited them live, said that John O'Korn told them and other reporters that we're built for this, to deal with a hostile environment, the way that we run our offense and the way that we communicate. I get it. That means they're going to run the ball and not worry about a whole lot at the line of scrimmage, but I'll tell you what, it's difficult to see with the way Penn State's defense has played and with the way Michigan's offense has played so far.
Yeah, and John O'Korn is going to be the quarterback. Wilton Speight was the starter at the beginning of the year. He's out. I believe he's out for the year. He was the quarterback for Michigan last year in the game that Penn State. It was really the game that kind of right after that, you saw Penn State kind of really get it together. They lost in September at Ann Arbor, 49-10. It was really just a long afternoon for James Franklin, his coaches, and his players. But they haven't lost since, I think, in the regular season, Penn State, and that was the game that I think, as far as bad Penn State football and James Franklin's during his time here at Penn State, that was like the last we really seen of that kind of football. They've been a different team since. And you mentioned defensive play, and that's second down here, what we're going to talk about here on the Penn State Blitz. Who does it better? Because Michigan's defense gets all the attention on the bye week. Just listening to the Michigan-Indiana game, that Michigan won 27-20 in overtime with a goal line stand. The commentators couldn't talk enough about, what it meant to go up against the Michigan defense. It's going to be a long afternoon. You're going to pay a physical price. And it is the best thing about this Michigan team. But my question is, Penn State's defense is number 1 in the country in terms of scoring defense. They've only allowed an average of 9 points a game. So really, when you talk about it, Don Brown at Michigan, Brent Pry at Penn State here, who does it better?
Yeah, I think that the reason to start off to the point you were making, that Penn State's defense doesn't get talked about maybe the same way, is that they don't have a Rashawn Gary, and they don't have a Maurice Hurst. And those two guys were big-time recruits that everyone knew were going to Michigan, and they've been dominant. I mean, they are. The defensive line play at Michigan is just outstanding, and I think that that's why that defense gets all the praise it does. I think the other reason is Penn State's defense is never really a national talking point. It's always the offense, good or bad, fairly or unfairly, no matter what Penn State's defense is ranked at. I'm sure that'll change this week, obviously, with all the attention this week put on this game. But to me, it's a toss-up. I think both defenses obviously have their strengths. Michigan's going to beat you up front. There's no question about it. Penn State's going to take the ball away from you, and they're going to fly to the ball every time they can. And I think they may have a little bit of advantage in the speed department when it comes to that. So there's no question neither offense is going to have it easy on Saturday. I think that when it ultimately comes down to it is whichever offense performs better against two very good defenses will come away with it. And Penn State's a 10-point favorite because they're widely expected to have the better offense.
Yeah, you mentioned Gary and you mentioned Hurst. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about them a little bit more here on the Penn State Blitz. Let's just see how quickly we get back to this subject.
Yes.
Oh, look, it's third down, and it's Penn State and a tale of two tackles. Penn State's offensive line, even though Penn State has scored on a regular basis through 6 games, some issues surfaced during their 31-7 win at Northwestern. Saquon Barkley only got loose once. He was tackled on 5 different carries for losses. It's caught the attention of the fan base. And right tackle in particular, Greg, has been a position I think that they really haven't settled on their guy, and they need better play from whoever is going to play. James Franklin was asked about the right tackle spot at his news conference on Tuesday, and there's really 2 players. They began the year with 3. It really sounds like right about now they're ready to take a long look at 1 of 2 guys. It's Will Fries and it's Chaz Wright. Chaz Wright was the starter last year. Will Fries is a redshirt freshman they really like. What do you think about the tale of 2 tackles here at Penn State?
I thought it was interesting that James Franklin began his answer to this question at Tuesday's news conference by saying, well, I'm not going to talk to you guys about injuries. And we saw Chaz Wright miss a game. We saw him play on an increasingly deeper rotation with Will Fries, which means Will Fries took most of the snaps, especially in the second half against Northwestern and against Indiana. So to me, there's this issue of Chaz Wright potentially probably being hurt and that he can't rep too many times from there. And then I think there's the belief that Will Fries was a 4-star recruit in high school. He's going to take his lumps, as most redshirt freshman offensive linemen do. But is he your best option when it comes down to it? Is he the guy that you want to have out there getting those reps to develop into what you hope will be a multi-year starter at tackle? I think that's where they're at right now. They're going to put Chaz Wright in there because I don't know if Will Fries may be ready to play a full Big Ten game every single snap, but he's obviously getting pretty close, and to me, that's the only way to look at it. Andrew Nelson clearly still banged up after the Iowa game to be really in that conversation, or at least it sort of seems that way. I mean, the only other point I'll make is that if they were going to change anything, James Franklin's not the kind of guy to let anyone know about it. I don't expect him to change anything, but I just thought that point was being underrated a little bit, the fact that he's not going to give Michigan 2 weeks or even a week to figure out how maybe the offensive line it could change for better attack. But it sounds like those 2 guys are the guys. The other 4 guys are obviously in their spots, and we'll see if they can play a little bit better. It sounds like execution's the key.
And on the bye week, James did appear on the Big Ten coaches teleconference, Greg. He was specifically asked about the there's one other variable that I think will probably still be considered if they don't get what they want out of the players we just talked about, Fries and Chaz Wright, and that is Brendan Mann, who is the right guard, has played exclusively at right guard this season. He was a tackle last year. He played the left side and the right side. A lot of people thought he was playing very well before he left the Iowa game and never returned. James said the plan right now is to stay with what they have, but would you rule out at some point a return by Brendan Mann at a very important spot?
I won't, and here's why. Because if Brendan Mann was going to move out there, well, Michigan could pull up last year's film and say, okay, this is how they're going to play this. So, no, I won't. I mean, at some point, I think that, they're giving up, 16 sacks. I believe it's second most in the Big Ten. I believe in Big Ten play, they might have surrendered the most, though. Northwestern and Maryland could have topped that during the bye week. But, I mean, at some point, they're going to have to take a long, hard look at things and say it's a shuffle worth it. Of course, the question inside is a Michael Mennett ready to play? Is a Mike Miranda going to have his red shirt burned? I think that's ultimately the question. He's been pretty adamant about the fact that he said it on the Big Ten call. He said it a little bit less directly today, but still kind of came out and said, hey, if we move one guy to solve a weakness, are we creating another one? And it's a fair point. So I'm not going to rule it out because if it continues, but I think they probably have watched enough practice to know that if they could get a better 5 on the field, they'd probably find a way to do it.
It's the Penn State Blitz here. We're through 3 downs, and I still don't think we're done talking about Penn State's offensive line and a couple of Michigan defenders. And I think that's our 4th down talking point, because I think it's a big deal in the game. How is Penn State going to deal with the combination of Michigan's two standout defensive linemen, Maurice Hurst inside, and Rashawn Gary outside. We just talked about the tackle position. I'm guessing if Rashawn Gary is 100% and he looked like he was able to finish the Indiana game after he left for a brief, I think a play or two. Don't you just put him just park him right over Penn State's right tackle and just turn him loose? How is Penn State going to account for two of the very best defensive line prospects, a tackle and a defensive end in the country?
Yeah, I mean, I think they only have three options. You tell me if there's more. One is they play better.
Yeah.
Two is they take Saquon Barkley out of the passing game frequently, and or Mike Gesicki, and have them stay in and block. Or three, they don't do either of those two things, and those two just spend most of the game in the backfield, and Penn State has to hope at that point that Trace McSorley can work his magic to get out of the pocket, stay upright while doing so, run away from those guys while doing so, and then find somebody open downfield against a fairly decent Michigan secondary. I mean, it's just, I don't know what the answer is if Penn State doesn't play better, because its offense is obviously impacted if those two key playmakers are not on the field and not in the passing game. At the same time, Bob, we've seen better on paper at least, offensive lines have a lot of issues with these two guys. And now you have a situation here where Penn State has questions, especially at the tackle spot. And if they can't play better than they have during the first 6 weeks before the bye week, it looks like a long night. It really does. These two guys are no joke. Gary, again, does seem like he is 100%. They're going to be in Penn State's face all night.
Yeah, and I think, if Penn State fans remember anything about last year's Michigan-Penn State game, it obviously one-sided, 49-10. James Franklin kind of trying to distance himself, from that effort as much as possible. But Maurice Hurst in that game just completely shredded Penn State's offensive line inside. 3 tackles for loss. They had 6 sacks in the game. And you're right. If you don't account for those guys and you don't do something specifically to try and neutralize them, Trace McSorley really could take a physical beating, and you just wonder where the points are going to come in this game. They're going to come at some point, but it might not just be straight up offensive football on either side. The offenses are going to need, I think, some help. So that's it for 4 downs here on the Penn State Blitz here on Penn Live. It's time to get to the overtime segment.
Yes,
and I do believe we have. Yes, we do. Some questions and some comments to address. So why don't you just tee it up?
All right. Well, let's get to it because we had 2 before we started. So Mitch likes our Facebook page already. So he left his comments at like 3 o'clock this morning, I think it was. But we talked about the offensive line a good bit, so we're going to skip that question, Mitch. But we'll go to his other question, which was the kicking game.
Yeah.
And your thoughts on whether Penn State's going to continue to see issues. James Franklin's convinced that this is going to fix itself. The problem is, just like the offensive line, what was the one thing he kept saying whenever there's an issue that doesn't seem to have a good answer, he always says, we're going to coach them, we're going to love them.
We're going to love them.
And then, we're going to get this fixed.
They better tough love them.
That's not always the answer. And I think the problem, Bob, is that they have issues in all 3 facets of the field goal kicking game. So I don't know, what are your thoughts? Better this week or about the same?
Well, and the theme is going to continue because Greg Pickel, if you watched the Michigan-Indiana game, Michigan blocked a field goal, and it was none other than Maurice Hurst with pressure inside who blocked the kick. I think it's a problem. Penn State's special teams are much improved. Blake Gillikin is a tremendous weapon. They have another weapon in DeAndre Tompkins, the punt returner. But where there's kind of a checkmate situation, and I think Michigan has the edge, is the Penn State kid who decommitted from Penn State, Quinn Nordin.
And James Franklin, very complimentary of him today.
Quinn Nordin has been probably, you could make an argument, maybe their best offensive weapon. I think he's 14 of 16 field goal conversions and attempts, and he's made some bombs. I do think he would love nothing better than to be in a tight game. He's the kind of kid that if he had to make a pressure kick for maybe either Michigan to tie it or win it, I would not bet against him. I do think this is one area of the game, specifically on special teams, that Michigan has the advantage, and I think that if Penn State finds themselves in a tight game in the 4th quarter, I don't know. I mean, they got the whiteout, they got the defense, they got a lot. They got Saquon Barkley, a lot of things going for them. But if Nordine's in the game to win it,
right,
there's not a lot I think Penn State can do about it. They better not get into that situation.
I agree. I think that you'd bet a little bit on 107,000 angry Penn State fans that he decommitted, screaming their heads off in an environment
he probably
that
will love it,
never
though.
kicked in before. But
Yeah.
you're right. He's the kind of kid that would love it. So that's a very interesting
Tyler Davis,
storyline.
6 for 13 this year with 2 blocks. He missed another short one at Northwestern. James Franklin is a loving person, obviously, but
right.
I just don't, at some point, I don't know if the biggest issue isn't mental, and I don't know how you get somebody out of a mental funk.
Right. All right. Well, we only got one more question, Bob. You can decide if you want to answer or not. It's a recruiting question. Would you like to answer it, or should I just tee myself?
Why don't we just throw it in the air?
Okay.
And if I look completely perplexed, which I often do when it comes to Penn State recruiting, I'm going to give you the high sign that you can answer it.
Well, do you think Rasheed Walker, the 4-star North Waldorf, Maryland, he plays at North Point, I believe. Do you think he's a 4-star offensive tackle? Penn State now has 2 to 3 spots left in this recruiting class. Do you think he's a take now that the Lions have an extra spot, presumably with Dorian Hardy now no longer in the class?
I got 2 things here. I'm definitely deferring to you on this one, and then I'm going to ask you a recruiting question that's not even on this little considerable list. So yeah, this is all you, but I do have a recruiting follow-up for you.
Fair. Well, the answer is yes. I mean, I think that you look at Penn State's situation. Was he always a take? Probably not. Do they have the room now to maybe take him? Yes. Obviously, with the Dorian Hardy situation, the defensive end from New Jersey, and Penn State parting ways, there's a spot available now. So was he always a take? Maybe not. It seemed like that back in the summer, and then things really got slow. Now, though, I mean, if you had an 8-ball, I would probably say yes. Go ahead. Have at it.
Okay, here's my recruiting question for Greg Pickel. So you're telling me that Penn State lost a top defensive end recruit.
Yes.
And that James Franklin was on bye week Saturday at the Harrisburg High Central Dauphin game.
Hard to believe.
Presumably to check out a Penn State verbal?
Yes, Shaquan Anderson Butts, yep.
But that's not what I want to ask you. What about Micah Parsons?
That's always the million-dollar question.
He still in play for Penn State?
I think so. I don't have any reason to not think so, but obviously that's a recruitment that's going to continue. If he still wants to announce at the Under Armour All-American game, early January, and then he would sign, of course, in February, so there'd be plenty of time for anything to still happen. So yes. Tyreek Smith, Cleveland, Ohio. He's a defensive end that's still in play.
Yeah.
He will be at Penn State this weekend. We'll have more on that tomorrow. Also, the other name to remember, Jason Oweh, another defensive end, Blairstown, New Jersey. All 4 stars there. Parsons, of course, a 5-star. Those are the guy to keep in mind along with Walker. We'll see how things play out.
Micah Parsons is still planning on enrolling in January where he goes, or has that been?
It's a good question. I don't know if that's still the case.
Okay.
It'll be something to find out sooner rather than later that we'll work on that.
All right, rank and Pickle real quick. Micah Parsons, 3 schools that are definitely in play for his services.
That's a good point. I mean, I think at this point, the question is the chatter about what happened at Ohio State good, bad, or ugly? That's the question. No one knows. I'd probably put Penn State on top right now, and I'd tie Ohio State and Nebraska for second and third. And then, if he decides to go visit somewhere else, that's the million-dollar question too. Because if he's going to go visit somewhere else, obviously would put one of those schools or multiple of those schools in play. There's nowhere to really go with this recruitment. It's going to take a while to continue to play out, so we'll have to wait and see. But that's where I'm at right now.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's why he gets the big bucks here with Penn Live and Penn State for this kind of recruiting stuff. I love it. And that's going to be a wrap for this edition of the Penn State Blitz here on Penn Live. And just one more reminder, whatever you're doing, you have to subscribe to the Penn Live Penn State channel. It's easy to do. There's a lot of great stuff from our video team. You go to youtube.com/allpennstate. That's it for this edition of the Penn State Blitz.